You wake up every day wearing a version of yourself that was never chosen, only assigned. A face built to survive, not to live. You move through crowds yet remain invisible, carrying silent wars no one will ever notice. Loneliness is no longer an emotion. It is your natural state. Rejection trained you to shrink. Fear taught you to stay quiet. Conditioning taught you to obey. You learned early that honesty costs too much, vulnerability gets punished, and fairness is a luxury for those protected by power. So you adapted. You swallowed your rage. You buried your hunger. You replaced desire with numb routine. And slowly, without resistance, your identity dissolved into something manageable, predictable, harmless. The world did not break you. It shaped you. Every ignored message, every dismissed opinion, every silent humiliation carved obedience into your nervous system. Now you feel the weight of something missing but cannot name it. A hollow pressure behind your eyes, a tension in your chest, a constant awareness that others are playing a deeper game while you are trapped inside rules you never agreed to. You sense manipulation everywhere, yet remain unable to escape it. Because the most effective prison is not built with walls. It is built with beliefs. And once your mind accepts them, the cage becomes permanent. You are not born into power. You are born into a fragile shape that can be bent, broken, erased, and rewritten. Before you ever learn your name, the world teaches you what you are allowed to be. Before you understand desire, it teaches you what to fear. Before you touch ambition, it teaches you shame. And slowly, layer by layer, your original self disappears under expectations, punishments, rejections, rules, and silent threats. What remains is not identity. It is survival programming. A carefully assembled version of you that avoids danger, seeks approval, and stays small enough to not be crushed. You mistake this shell for your real self. You defend it. You protect it. You build your entire life around it. And that is why power never reaches you. Because power requires destruction first. Not of others, of yourself. The self you call me is a construction. It is a response. A reaction to pain, abandonment, failure, comparison, humiliation, and fear. Every time you were laughed at, you learned to stay quiet. Every time you were ignored, you learned to disappear. Every time you were punished for honesty, you learned deception. Every time you were rejected for authenticity, you learned performance. What you now call your personality is just a map of your past wounds. A collection of emotional scars disguised as character traits. You do not act from truth. You act from memory, from trauma, from conditioning, from silent agreements made with yourself during moments of weakness. Agreements like, never stand out, never speak first, never ask, never want too much, never be seen. These agreements shape your reality more than any external force. And until they are shattered, you remain predictable. And predictability is weakness. To construct power, the old identity must collapse. Not gently, not gradually, but violently. Because the mind will always cling to familiar suffering over unfamiliar strength. It will choose a known prison over an unknown freedom. It will sabotage transformation to preserve comfort, even if that comfort is agony. That is why most people never change. Not because they cannot, but because they are terrified of losing who they are. Even if who they are is broken. Especially if who they are is broken. Pain becomes identity. Struggle becomes personality. Victimhood becomes moral armor. And misery becomes home. To step outside of it feels like betrayal. To abandon it feels like death. And in a way it is. The death of a version of you that has kept you alive but never allowed you to live. There is a moment when you begin to see it. A moment of unsettling clarity. When you realize that your thoughts are not truly yours. Your reactions are rehearsed. Your fears are inherited. Your beliefs are implanted. Your limits are enforced. You notice how quickly your mind rushes to justify weakness. How it manufactures excuses. How it creates narratives to protect comfort. How it reframes surrender as humility. how it calls fear morality, how it calls passivity wisdom. You realize that you have been trained to admire softness, celebrate restraint, glorify patience, and worship obedience. You have been taught to equate power with corruption, dominance with evil, ambition with arrogance. Not because these things are inherently dangerous, but because they are dangerous to those who already rule. A powerless population must believe power is immoral. A submissive population must believe dominance is toxic. A controllable population must believe ambition is sinful. And so the first shackle placed on you is moral, not physical. When identity begins to fracture, confusion arrives first. A disorientation, a hollowing. You no longer recognize your reactions. Your old fears no longer feel logical, but they still feel real. Your habits start to feel foreign, but you keep repeating them. You feel suspended between who you were and who you are becoming, belonging to neither. This is the most dangerous phase, because this is where most people retreat. The emptiness feels unbearable. The uncertainty feels like chaos. The silence inside feels like annihilation. And so they rush back to the old self, back to familiar pain, back to comfortable suffering, back to predictable disappointment. They rebuild the cage because the open sky feels too vast. But if you endure this phase, something changes. The noise fades. The conditioning weakens. The emotional chains loosen. And in that silence, something ancient awakens. A raw awareness, a presence, a calm alertness that does not seek approval, does not beg for belonging, does not crave validation. A self that does not apologize for existing. Power is not added, it is revealed, but only after everything false is burned away. And that burning is not poetic, it is brutal. Feels like losing yourself, like standing naked in a hostile world with no armor, no narrative, no identity to hide behind. Your ego resists violently. It will flood you with fear, guilt, doubt, nostalgia, regret, and longing. It will remind you of who you used to be. It will replay old memories to pull you back. It will whisper that you are becoming cold, selfish, heartless. It will accuse you of betrayal. It will threaten loneliness, because it knows its survival depends on your obedience. And the moment you stop obeying, its authority dissolves. This is the silent war no one talks about. The internal coup. The overthrow of a ruler that has governed your mind since childhood. The dismantling of beliefs that once protected you. The erasure of emotional reflexes that once saved you. The abandonment of coping mechanisms that once kept you alive. You grieve these losses. You mourn them. You feel their absence like phantom limbs. But slowly beneath the grief, strength begins to form. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but dense, heavy, grounded strength. A gravity that pulls situations toward you instead of pushing you away. A presence that unsettles others without effort. A stillness that commands attention without demand. This is the architecture of power, built on clarity, hardened by detachment, stabilized by self-possession. Identity shattering exposes the mechanisms of control. You begin to see how social structures reward conformity and punish deviation. How emotional vulnerability is exploited. How kindness is leveraged. How guilt is weaponized. How morality is manipulated. How shame is distributed. You notice how often people act not from desire, but from fear of exclusion. How entire lives are shaped around avoiding judgment. How truth is buried beneath politeness. How authenticity is traded for acceptance. And you realize that the greatest leverage in any system is psychological. Not force, not wealth, not status, but perception. Control how people see themselves and you control how they behave. Break their identity and you own their actions. Reinforce their labels and you guide their destiny. But when your own identity is gone, when your self-image is no longer fixed, you become ungraspable. There is no predictable reaction, no emotional handle, no ideological anchor, no behavioral script. You move from observation instead of impulse, from awareness instead of habit, from intention instead of reflex. You do not rush to explain. You do not hurry to defend. You do not scramble to justify. Silence becomes your default. Stillness becomes your shield. And in that stillness you see everything. Patterns, motivations, insecurities, hidden agendas, emotional leaks, micro-expressions, power dynamics. You read rooms before words are spoken. You sense shifts before they occur. You detect weakness before it reveals itself, because you are no longer lost inside yourself. You are watching. This detachment is often mistaken for coldness, but it is clarity. It is emotional independence. It is the absence of internal chaos. When you no longer depend on external validation, you become immune to manipulation. When you no longer fear rejection, you become impossible to control. When you no longer seek belonging, you become sovereign. And sovereignty is terrifying to a world built on compliance. A person who does not need approval cannot be bribed. A person who does not fear isolation cannot be threatened. A person who does not crave acceptance cannot be socially engineered. They operate outside the usual levers of influence, and this makes them dangerous. Not because they seek destruction, but because they cannot be contained. The shattering continues in layers. Old emotional reactions collapse. You no longer flinch at confrontation. You no longer panic at silence. You no longer crumble under criticism. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer explain your worth. You no longer argue for your place. You simply occupy it. And those who still live inside their fragile identities feel exposed in your presence. Your calm unsettles their noise. Your stillness highlights their chaos. Your certainty magnifies their doubt. They project. They accuse. They mock. They provoke. They attempt to pull you back into emotional engagement. But you do not follow. You remain distant. Not detached from reality, but detached from emotional bait. And this is when true psychological power begins. You begin to understand that identity is a tool, not a truth. A mask, not a self. Something to be worn, not worshipped. You choose when to be intense, when to be soft, when to be silent, when to be dominant, when to be invisible. You adapt without losing yourself because you are no longer confined to a single version of you. You are fluid, strategic, controlled. You enter situations already aware of the dynamics. You sense hierarchies instantly. You see who seeks dominance, who seeks approval, who seeks safety, who seeks control. And you position yourself accordingly. Not through manipulation, but through alignment. You let others reveal themselves while you remain unreadable. You become a mirror instead of a performer. The deeper the shattering goes, the more ruthless your honesty becomes. Not outwardly, inwardly. You no longer lie to yourself about your motives. You acknowledge your hunger, your ambition, your envy, your desire for dominance, your longing for influence, your craving for control. You stop moralizing these instincts. You study them. You refine them. You discipline them. You integrate them. Because suppressed power turns into self-destruction, but mastered power turns into sovereignty. You become the architect of your impulses instead of their prisoner. You channel aggression into focus. You convert anger into clarity. You refine fear into awareness. You transmute pain into presence. And slowly, the fragmented parts of you assemble into something cohesive. Not soft, not comforting, but solid, heavy, real. This process is isolating, because you can no longer fully relate to those who still cling to their constructed selves. Their fears feel foreign. Their dramas feel performative. Their anxieties feel repetitive. Their conversations feel shallow. You listen, but you do not absorb. You observe, but you do not engage. And in this distance, loneliness intensifies. But it is no longer the loneliness of rejection. It is the loneliness of separation, of standing apart, of seeing too clearly to pretend, of understanding too deeply to belong easily. And this loneliness becomes your companion, a silent witness to your transformation, a reminder of the cost of awareness, a tax paid for clarity. Yet in this solitude your mind sharpens. Without emotional noise, your perception expands. You see cause and effect with surgical precision. You anticipate outcomes. You sense trajectories. You understand leverage. You recognize timing. You detect opportunity. And you move when others hesitate. You remain still when others panic. You speak when silence becomes power. You stay silent when words would weaken. You begin to operate on a different frequency. One that is not reactive, not impulsive, not desperate, but deliberate, strategic, calculated. And in this frequency the world responds differently. Not with admiration, but with subtle deference, with cautious respect, with unspoken acknowledgement. Identity shattering does not make you cruel. It makes you honest, brutally honest, with yourself first. You see your limitations clearly. You accept them without excuses. You confront them without comfort. You refine them without mercy. You no longer romanticize struggle. You do not glorify pain. You do not seek suffering. You simply refuse to be shaped by it. You use it. Every failure becomes data. Every rejection becomes information. Every loss becomes leverage. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is sacred. Everything is studied. Everything is integrated. Everything is converted into awareness. And as this awareness deepens, something unsettling occurs. You realize how rare it is. How few people ever reach this stage. How most will live and die inside their assigned identities. How entire lifetimes will be spent chasing validation, security, approval, and belonging. How dreams will be traded for comfort. How potential will be sacrificed for predictability. How souls will be exchanged for safety. And you understand that there is no rescue, no mass awakening, no collective liberation, only individual exits from the psychological maze. And each exit requires a private collapse, a silent breakdown, a solitary reckoning, a complete annihilation of who you thought you were. This realization does not make you arrogant. It makes you distant. You move through the world like a ghost, present but untouched, engaged but unattached, a participant without emotional investment. You see the games being played, but you no longer feel compelled to join. You choose your battles. You choose your alliances. You choose your exposures. You reveal nothing unless it serves. You share nothing unless it strengthens. You trust nothing unless it proves. You become slow, measured, unreactive. And in that slowness, power accumulates. But the shattering never truly ends. There is always another layer to dismantle, another illusion to confront, another comfort to abandon, another attachment to sever. Each level of power demands another sacrifice, another identity death, another descent into uncertainty. And each time the cost increases, the isolation deepens, the silence expands, the weight intensifies. You begin to sense that there is no final form, no completed self, only continuous refinement, endless shedding, infinite becoming. And this endlessness is both terrifying and liberating, because once you have shattered yourself once, you are no longer afraid of collapse. You understand that destruction is not the opposite of creation. It is its prerequisite. That endings are not losses but openings. That chaos is not disorder but potential. That emptiness is not absence but space. And so you walk willingly into the unknown, not seeking comfort, not chasing certainty, but hunting transformation. You allow yourself to dissolve again and again, knowing that each time you will return heavier, sharper, and more complete. And yet, even now, standing at this edge, feeling the gravity of what is forming inside you, there remains one final fear. Not of failure, not of rejection, not of loss, but of what you might become if you continue. Of the distance that will grow between you and everyone else. Of the humanity that might fade. Of the emotional warmth that might vanish. Of the part of you that once longed to belong. Because beyond this threshold, there is no return to innocence. No retreat into simplicity. No refuge in ignorance. Only clarity. Cold, precise, relentless clarity. And the question that begins to echo in the silence is not whether you can continue, but whether you are willing to become what this path demands. Because the deeper you go, the less human you feel, and the more powerful you become. Pain arrives before language, before memory, before identity. It enters the nervous system as a signal, not a story, a shock, a tightening, a silent scream inside the chest. And long before you understand what it means, your body begins to adapt to it. You tense, you withdraw, you harden, you become alert, because pain is not just suffering, it is information. It is the body's earliest teacher. It tells you where the world is dangerous, where trust collapses, where illusion shatters, and where vulnerability becomes liability. And if you pay attention, if you stay conscious through it instead of escaping, it begins to reveal something darker and far more powerful than comfort ever could. It reveals how control is built, not through pleasure, but through pressure. Every form of dominance begins with pain, not inflicted, absorbed, processed, understood. The human mind is not shaped by ease. It is sculpted by resistance. Comfort preserves. Pain transforms. When life is gentle, the mind remains soft, passive, naive. It dreams. It hopes. It waits. But when life becomes brutal, the mind sharpens. It adapts. It calculates. It prepares. Emotional pain strips away fantasy. It removes innocence. It dissolves entitlement. It exposes raw human nature beneath the surface of social performance. And in that exposure, clarity emerges. A brutal clarity that cannot be accessed through safety or stability. Pain forces you inward. It traps you inside your own awareness. It removes distractions. It silences noise. It isolates you from emotional comfort and social reassurance. And in that isolation, you begin to observe yourself with unsettling honesty. You see your weakness, your neediness, your dependency, your fear, your craving for validation, your hunger for approval. You see how deeply your emotional state is tied to the reactions of others. How fragile your sense of self becomes when affection disappears. How desperate your mind becomes when connection is threatened. Pain humiliates you into awareness. It exposes the invisible chains that bind you. And once seen, they can never be unseen. This is where psychological dominance begins. Not in overpowering others, but in mastering the terrain inside yourself. Because emotional pain forces confrontation. It drags you face to face with your unresolved wounds, your suppressed anger, your buried grief, your abandoned dreams, your unspoken regrets. It tears open psychological compartments you have sealed for survival. And in that tearing, emotional depth forms. Not sensitivity, depth. A capacity to feel without collapsing. To witness suffering without drowning. To remain present inside emotional storms without dissociating. This emotional endurance becomes your foundation. While others numb themselves, distract themselves, medicate themselves, or escape, you stay. You endure. You observe. And in that endurance, your mind evolves. Most people run from pain. They anesthetize it with pleasure, noise, substances, social validation, constant movement. They build lives designed to avoid discomfort at all costs. And in doing so, they remain psychologically fragile. Because any unexpected emotional impact shatters them. Any loss destabilizes them. Any rejection cripples them. Their resilience is artificial, dependent on stable external conditions. But when you allow pain to shape you, when you let it carve strength into your nervous system, your resilience becomes internal, structural, permanent. You do not require emotional stability around you because you carry stability within you. And this internal stability creates presence, a grounded stillness that others feel instinctively. Emotional pain rewires perception. It alters how you see human behavior. You begin to notice patterns, cycles of desire and disappointment, attachment and abandonment, hope and betrayal. You start to recognize the scripts people follow. How trauma repeats itself through relationships. How unmet needs manifest as control. How insecurity disguises itself as arrogance. How fear masks itself as aggression. You begin to see that most actions are not logical. They are emotional reactions to unresolved internal conflict. And once you understand this, influence becomes inevitable. Because people cannot hide their wounds. They leak through tone, posture, timing, silence, and hesitation. Pain teaches you to read these leaks. Your own suffering becomes your training ground. Each heartbreak sharpens your emotional perception. Each betrayal deepens your psychological awareness. Each humiliation heightens your sensitivity to power dynamics. You learn how trust is built, how it is broken, how it is manipulated, how it is repaired. You observe the delicate mechanics of attachment, the fragile balance between closeness and distance. You learn how easily affection can be weaponized, how quickly intimacy can turn into leverage, and you begin to understand why emotional pain is the most efficient teacher. Because it forces you to study human behavior with survival intensity. Detached curiosity becomes impossible. You learn because you must. Pain also introduces you to emotional restraint. When suffering becomes constant, emotional outbursts lose their value. You stop reacting. You stop venting. You stop explaining. You conserve energy. You internalize. And in this restraint, a new form of control emerges. The ability to feel deeply without expressing excessively. The ability to remain composed while chaos moves through you. This emotional containment creates gravity. Others sense it. They feel your calm. They feel your steadiness. They feel your silence. And in that silence they project. They reveal. They fill the void with their insecurities. You do not need to extract information. It flows toward you naturally. Because unresolved emotion always seeks release. As pain accumulates, detachment develops. Not emotional numbness. Emotional selectivity. You no longer invest in every interaction. You no longer attach to every connection. You become careful with your energy. Strategic with your vulnerability. You learn that emotional exposure is not intimacy. It is risk. And risk must be calculated. You begin to choose who has access to your inner world. And this selective openness increases your psychological leverage. Because those who reveal everything lose control. Those who reveal nothing appear distant. But those who reveal selectively maintain power. They shape perception. They manage emotional distance. They remain unpredictable. Pain also trains patience. Deep, silent patience. Not the waiting of hope, but the waiting of observation. You become comfortable in stillness. You no longer need immediate resolution. You allow situations to unfold. You allow people to reveal themselves. You do not rush outcomes. You study trajectories. You let emotional tension build until clarity emerges. And this patience gives you timing, the most overlooked element of dominance. Because knowing when to act matters more than knowing how. Pain slows you down enough to see timing clearly. Through suffering, you become familiar with loss. And familiarity with loss destroys fear. Once you have lost deeply, once you have grieved fully, once you have felt emptiness swallow you whole, you stop fearing its return. You realize that you can survive it. That you can walk through emotional collapse and emerge intact. And this knowledge is liberating. Because fear of loss is the primary mechanism of control. Fear of abandonment. Fear of rejection. Fear of humiliation. Fear of failure. Fear of isolation. When these fears dissolve, so does vulnerability. You become psychologically uncoercible. You cannot be threatened with what you have already endured. Emotional pain also dismantles illusion. It destroys the fantasy of fairness. It exposes the randomness of reward. It reveals the indifference of the universe. You see that effort does not guarantee success. That morality does not guarantee protection. That loyalty does not guarantee reciprocity. And in this realization, naivety dies. You stop expecting justice. You stop anticipating rescue. You stop assuming good intent. Not because you become cynical, but because you become realistic. And realism sharpens survival instincts. You begin to rely on perception instead of hope, strategy instead of faith, awareness instead of optimism. This realism allows you to navigate social structures more effectively. You no longer misinterpret politeness as loyalty. You no longer confuse attention with respect. You no longer mistake intimacy for commitment. You see beneath surfaces. You detect subtle shifts in tone, micro changes in behavior. You recognize emotional distancing before words change. You sense withdrawal before it manifests. You feel manipulation before it becomes overt. And this anticipatory awareness gives you psychological advantage. You are no longer reacting. You are positioning. Pain also teaches emotional economy. You learn where to invest, where to withdraw, where to remain neutral. You stop wasting emotional energy on those who cannot reciprocate depth. You stop overextending. You stop chasing. You become internally full. And this fullness changes your presence. You no longer approach others with hunger. You approach them with completeness. And hunger repels, but fullness attracts. People gravitate toward emotional stability, toward grounded energy, toward silent strength. Without knowing why, they feel safer, more curious, more open. And this openness gives you insight. The deeper the pain, the deeper the emotional intelligence. You begin to recognize emotional patterns across cultures, personalities, and environments. You see the universal structure of suffering. Abandonment wounds, worthlessness wounds, betrayal wounds, rejection wounds, control wounds. You begin to categorize behaviors not as good or bad, but as wounded or secure. You understand that cruelty often emerges from unresolved vulnerability, that dominance often masks fear, that submission often hides rage. And this understanding removes emotional reactivity. You stop taking things personally. You see the wound behind the action. And this perspective gives you emotional superiority. You remain calm where others escalate. You remain silent where others explode. You remain detached where others collapse. Pain also refines communication. You learn the power of pause, of silence, of measured words. Because emotional suffering teaches you that words can wound more deeply than actions. You become deliberate, intentional. You speak only when necessary. You choose language carefully. You observe how subtle phrasing shifts emotional response, how tone alters interpretation, how timing changes impact. You begin to understand that communication is psychological positioning, and through pain you learn to position yourself precisely. Emotional pain also dissolves dependency. You learn to self-soothe, to self-regulate, to self-stabilize. You no longer rely on external reassurance to calm your nervous system. You develop internal grounding, breath, awareness, stillness, presence. You learn to sit with discomfort without escaping, to remain conscious during emotional storms. And this self-regulation becomes dominance, because those who can regulate their internal state control their external behavior, and those who control their behavior control their outcomes. This internal control changes how others perceive you. They sense composure, stability, calm authority. Even when you say nothing, your presence influences the emotional atmosphere. You become an anchor in unstable environments, a point of reference. People mirror your energy. They lower their voices. They slow their movements. They become more measured. Without trying, you regulate the emotional field around you. And this regulation is power. Silent, subtle, invisible, but undeniable. As emotional pain accumulates, ambition transforms. You no longer seek success to impress. You seek mastery to stabilize. You seek competence to secure independence. You seek influence to protect autonomy. Your drive becomes internal, detached from external applause. You become relentless, focused, persistent, not fueled by ego but by clarity. You understand that emotional independence requires structural independence, financial, social, psychological, and so you build, quietly, patiently, without announcement, without validation. Pain also strips away entitlement. You stop expecting ease. You stop demanding comfort. You accept difficulty as default. And this acceptance eliminates frustration. You move through hardship without complaint, without resentment, without victimhood. You see struggle as terrain, not injustice. And this mindset makes you formidable. Because while others break under pressure, you sharpen. While others seek relief, you seek leverage. While others collapse, you adapt. The more pain you survive, the less external chaos can shake you. Emotional volatility around you becomes background noise. You remain centered. You do not absorb emotional turbulence. You observe it. And this observational stance gives you strategic clarity. You are no longer emotionally compromised. You see options. You see exits. You see opportunities. Even inside conflict. Especially inside conflict. Pain also deepens your solitude. You become selective with companionship. You prefer silence over shallow connection, depth over quantity, meaning over distraction. And in this solitude, your inner world expands. You reflect. You analyze. You contemplate. You dissect your experiences. You extract lessons. You refine perception. You build a psychological framework for understanding reality. And this framework becomes your internal compass. You no longer rely on social consensus. You rely on internal coherence. This internal coherence produces confidence. Not performative confidence. Not loud dominance. But grounded certainty. You trust your perception. You trust your instincts. You trust your judgment. And this trust eliminates hesitation. You move decisively. You commit fully. You stand firm. And others feel this certainty. They respond to it. They defer to it. They align with it. Because certainty is contagious. And uncertainty is destabilizing. Pain also teaches you restraint in victory. You do not celebrate prematurely. You do not expose advantage. You do not reveal strategy. You maintain composure even in success. Because pain has taught you how quickly fortune can reverse. You remain humble before randomness, prepared for disruption, always alert, always adaptive. Through emotional suffering, you also develop compassion. Not sentimental compassion, but perceptive compassion. You understand the roots of suffering. You recognize pain in others. You see the wounds beneath behavior. And this recognition gives you influence. You know how to approach, how to withdraw, how to comfort, how to distance. You understand emotional triggers. And understanding triggers means understanding control. Not to exploit, but to navigate, to protect yourself, to avoid unnecessary conflict, to manage relationships strategically. Pain also eliminates illusion about permanence. You understand that everything changes, that attachments dissolve, that structures collapse, that certainty erodes. And in this impermanence, you find freedom. You stop clinging. You stop resisting change. You flow with transitions. You adapt quickly. You detach easily. You rebuild efficiently. And this adaptability becomes dominance. Because rigid minds break. Flexible minds evolve. As emotional pain refines you, you begin to embody quiet authority. You no longer need to assert dominance. You do not need to demand respect. Your presence commands it. Your stillness projects it. Your restraint radiates it. Others sense depth. They sense experience. They sense emotional endurance. And they respond accordingly. Without conscious decision, they grant space, attention, deference. But this transformation is not comfortable. It is lonely. It is isolating. It separates you from innocence, from simplicity, from naive connection. You become heavier, more introspective, more detached. You carry psychological weight that few can understand, and this weight creates distance. You feel misunderstood, unseen, unrelatable, but you also feel sovereign, grounded, unshakable, and this trait is unavoidable. Emotional dominance requires emotional depth, and emotional depth requires suffering. There is a moment when you realize that pain has not weakened you. It has armored you, not with hardness, but with awareness, with presence, with psychological density. You move differently. You think differently. You feel differently. You are no longer reactive. You are responsive. You are no longer impulsive. You are intentional. You are no longer desperate. You are deliberate. And yet, beneath this control, there remains a quiet echo of vulnerability, a reminder of what pain took, of what it erased, of the softness that once existed, of the innocence that can never return. You feel this loss in silence. You carry it without complaint. You accept it as the price of clarity. But sometimes, in the stillness of night, when the world is quiet and no one is watching, the weight becomes noticeable. The depth becomes heavy, and you sense how far you have traveled from who you once were. Because pain does not just build power. It reshapes identity. It alters perception. It changes orientation. It rewires desire. And once transformed, you can never fully return. You stand between worlds, between softness and strength, between connection and solitude, between humanity and dominance. And the deeper you go, the more irreversible the change becomes. And somewhere in this transformation, a question begins to form. A quiet, unsettling question that lingers beneath awareness. Not about whether you can continue, but about what will remain of you if you do. Because emotional pain can forge psychological dominance. But it also extracts a cost paid in innocence, in warmth, in simplicity, in emotional lightness. And as you stand at this edge, forged by suffering, shaped by endurance, stabilized by awareness, the path forward no longer looks like ascent. It looks like descent into deeper understanding, deeper detachment, deeper power. And the question is no longer whether you can endure the pain, but whether you are willing to let it finish its work. Morality is the first story you are taught, long before you are taught how the world actually works, and it is delivered with the softness of protection and the authority of certainty, so you never question it. You are told what is right, what is wrong, what is fair, what is evil, what is noble, what is shameful, and you accept it because you are young, because you are fragile, because you need structure, and because chaos terrifies a mind that has not yet learned to stand alone. These rules become your compass. They become your conscience. They become your internal judge. And slowly, invisibly, they become your cage. Because morality, as it is taught, is not a neutral force. It is a system. A carefully engineered psychological architecture designed to stabilize power, preserve hierarchy, and maintain control. Not through force, but through belief. Not through chains, but through internal obedience. The most efficient form of control is not oppression. It is voluntary submission disguised as virtue. From the moment you can speak, you are trained to self-police, to restrain your impulses, to suppress your aggression, to temper your ambition, to dilute your hunger, to apologize for wanting more. You are taught that dominance is cruelty, that ambition is arrogance, that authority is corruption, that strength is dangerous. You are told to share, to be patient, to be kind, to be humble, to be forgiving, to wait your turn, to accept less, to stay in your place. And all of this is presented as moral development, as emotional maturity, as spiritual elevation. But beneath the language of goodness lies a darker function: to keep you predictable, to keep you compliant, to keep you small enough to manage.